60 Minutes Rewind.
A dirty war, that's what the Argentines called it. But when it was going on in the middle 70s, no one knew the extent of it. Now they do. In that dirty war, perhaps as many as 10,000 Argentines or more, men, women, and children who were labeled left-wing terrorists, were kidnapped off the streets by the military regime, tortured, and killed. Because no records were kept, the victims became known as the disappeared. Only now, under the democratic regime of Argentina's new civilian president, Raúl Alfonsín, is the world beginning to learn the full story. But long before the new regime came to power, some of the mothers of the disappeared were trying to get that story out to the world. At 3:30 every Thursday afternoon in Buenos Aires, a group of women wearing white kerchiefs, along with their supporters, walk for half an hour around the middle of the Plaza de Mayo in front of the Casa Rosada, Argentina's presidential palace, just as they have for the past 7 years. There are no speeches, no chanting. They carry nothing but the pictures of their missing children, the disappeared.
My 3 children are missing.
Your 3 children?
Yes, yes.
How old?
They have been kidnapped. The eldest was 25 years old when he was kidnapped.
This is your daughter.
Es mi hija.
Sí, esta es su hija.
Sí, es mi hija.
Yes, it is.
And why did they take her?
¿Y por qué la llevaron a ella?
No sé por qué.
She doesn't know why.
This other woman said she had 3 children who disappeared, 2 of them girls.
The 2 girls were pregnant. One was pregnant of about only 10 days away from having the kid.
What happened?
My son was taken away at 2 o'clock in the morning, the 10th of November 1976.
Why?
Why? I always ask everybody why. I am going to ask to the government also why, and to Alfonsín also. He must tell me why he disappeared. I want to know it.
To give some answers, to give an accounting of the horrors inflicted by the military regime to the mothers of the Plaza de Mayo and to all Argentines, the new government of President Raúl Alfonsín has set up a commission headed by 12 leading Argentines and 1 non-Argentine American rabbi, Marshall Meyer, who has lived in Argentina for the past 25 years and leads one of the largest Jewish congregations in Buenos Aires. He was one of the first religious leaders in Catholic Argentina to speak out, not because of acts just against Jews, but because of his outrage at the brutality directed against people of all faiths. The task of the commission and its staff to gather all the information they can about the disappeared and turn it over to the authorities to be used in prosecuting those responsible. Every day, Argentines come to the commission. Every day, Argentines give painful witness, present evidence, like these parents of a 20-year-old girl, a fine art student, kidnapped off the streets of Buenos Aires in 1976. Rabbi Meyer interpreted for us.
21st of December 1977, she was still alive. We have witnesses that saw her alive in the hands of the military.
Many of the mothers and families of the disappeared have fled to other countries, to France, for example. Rabbi Meyer met with some of them in Paris. One of them, a mother of a Uruguayan boy who had disappeared in Argentina. There were many such cases. Although her son has been missing for 8 years, she insists he must still be alive. I'm looking for him alive, she says. All of us mothers are looking for our children alive. Another mother says she can't take it any longer. Tragically, some of those disappeared are now being found in places like this, a cemetery on the outskirts of Buenos Aires. Men working to exhume the remains, the bones of bodies hastily and secretly buried here years ago. But these remains give no answers to the mothers. There are no names, no identities, no gravestones.
This was one of the many places where we found hundreds of people buried, anonymous graves, common graves. There are children. We found skeletons of pregnant women with fetuses that were murdered while they're pregnant. The fingers were cut off, the heads were cut off, and in many cases the teeth were destroyed so that you couldn't identify.
And no names.
And no names, of course. So why bother burying them? Why bother killing them? Why kill them to start with? Why? There are no answers when you're involved with barbarism and savagery.
How did all this happen? Buenos Aires seems an improbable backdrop to such horror. Laid out late in the last century in the grand style of a European capital, it looks like Paris or Rome. But beneath the prosperous facade are rampant social tensions. They erupted in the early 70s in a violent wave of terrorism and political assassination. Terrorism the civilian authorities seemed unable to cope with. And that is what triggered the military coup of 1976. James Nielsen is editor of the English-language daily, the Buenos Aires Herald, one of the few publications that was to speak out early on against the military regime.
On March 24, 1976, when the military came marching in, the tanks rolled along the streets, amongst the majority of the inhabitants of the country, not just the middle class, but many working class, there was a sense of relief. At long last, we're going to have a strong hand, that these terrorists are going to be dealt with, and our problems are going to be over. And of course, it didn't work that way.
Every general or admiral or brigadier had his province, and they milked it, and they stole, and they did what they wanted, and they killed whomever they wished, and they were accountable to no one. They worked with complete impunity. And this is the story.
The sinister symbols of the dirty war were unmarked green Ford Falcons like these cruising the streets of Argentina's cities. Inside, plainclothesmen with lists of suspects to be picked up and carried off to brutal interrogation, often to death. As the military saw it, it was a fight to the end against international communism. Anyone might be the enemy. Like the children of Renee Eppelbaum, the mother we met in the Plaza de Mayo, a widow who lost all three of her children. First, her 25-year-old son Luigi picked up off the streets of Buenos Aires. He sympathized, she acknowledged, with the left.
When I say he sympathized with the left, that means that he wanted to improve the conditions of life for poor people. I think that's not a crime. You know that Christ himself, Jesus Christ, well, I think he also tried to help poor people.
Of course. Of course.
So I suppose they would have kidnapped Jesus Christ.
For safety's sake, she sent her two younger children off to her small summer home in Punta del Este, Uruguay. 2 months later, they were kidnapped. They were last seen alive 7 years ago in a building belonging to the federal police outside Buenos Aires.
I never thought that could happen to my children.
One of the major centers of the dirty war was the Naval Mechanics School in Buenos Aires. Up to 4,000 people may have been tortured here.
Charged with what?
No charges. Don't be naive. What are you talking about, charges? There was no law. There was no justice. Don't think as an American. You're in Argentina here. What do you mean charges?
Sometimes there were private deals made in which the kidnapped person was sold back to their families for quite large sums. If you were lucky enough to know some colonel or some admiral, maybe you could save her in time. Otherwise, your chances of saving her were very, very, very small.
So, in effect, this was...
The killing machine worked very quickly.
In here, people were tortured to death. People were trasladado, which means in English, transported. They were taken in helicopters and dropped, drugged or alive into the River Plate, which is on the other side. Hundreds of people were dropped from helicopters into the river. People were burned to death in there, Mike. I have specific denunciations of people who they dumped a couple of liters of gasoline, and in front of other prisoners, they threw a match right on the person. The person was burned to death, right here, right here.
In fact, in the offices of the mothers of the Plaza de Mayo, there are pictures of scores of children. They, too, are among the disappeared. Some of them born in military prisons, some of them picked up along with their parents. Their relatives have heard nothing of them or their parents since. Whatever records the military kept have been destroyed. In fact, in some cases, when frantic mothers went to authorities asking about their children, they were told to forget them, that the mothers were obviously not fit to be parents.
Yes, that's really, they say to many mothers, you must forget that you have a son.
You were not a good mother?
Yes.
You didn't bring up your children
Yes.
properly?
You must forget them. You go away, home, and forget that you have a child.
Despite their fear, out of desperation in April of 1977, 14 mothers of the disappeared Women like these defied the military's ban on demonstrations and came to the Plaza de Mayo. They reappeared every Thursday. At first, the authorities and most Argentines wrote them off contemptuously. They were called las locas, the crazy women of the Plaza de Mayo.
Suddenly these women appeared saying, "Where are my children?" They were asking questions which Argentines as a whole, which the entire middle class, which most of the press, which religious leaders, which politicians had not wanted to ask or had been afraid to ask.
But they would march every Thursday across from the Casa Rosada.
But nobody would see them, just as nobody would see the chimneys of the gas chambers in Nazi Germany. It's much the same here. People didn't want to know what was happening because it was shameful, because they'd have to revise all their ideas about what kind of society Argentina was.
In any event, most Argentines, particularly those with money, felt the military were doing a fine job. The terrorists were being wiped out. The economy was booming. If people were disappearing, well, probably the military had some good reason. The protests of the mothers and the few other human rights activists were met with what was called a conspiracy of silence.
Perhaps some of this was because of fear, terror.
Anybody and everybody who was suspected was destroyed, was eliminated, was arrested, and nobody opened up their mouths except a few people who also disappeared. Over 97 journalists. Your profession was one of the most horribly dangerous professions in this country. Lawyers disappeared, and we were trying desperately at this time to awaken world opinion to it.
Where was the church, the Catholic Church? This is a Catholic country.
The church, as an institution, did not protest human rights violations strongly at all. The church mirrored Argentine society on this issue.
The Jewish community. There were a good many Jews who were among the disappeared.
Apart from the Rabbi Marshall Meyer, there were very few Jewish leaders who protested against the butchery of many Jews or Christians or atheists or whatever.
Everybody was afraid. And this happened in our Argentina. And still, the people is afraid. They don't want to talk, many people.
But the mothers continued to march, and in December of 1977, at a church in Buenos Aires, they themselves became the target of the military. A group of mothers of the disappeared, and some of their supporters, including a French nun, were holding a meeting inside this church. When they came out, 9 of them, including the French nun, were simply taken away by plainclothesmen. They have never been heard from since. They joined the ranks of the disappeared. You marched the next Thursday?
Yes, we did.
Aren't you very worried that the same could happen to you?
It was that we knew we had to.
But when you marched week after week after week and nobody paid attention.
It was the only way we had. You know, the press, the media, didn't say anything.
I know.
So we were the only one who could attract attention, no matter the risks. That we didn't care about that.
The story will continue after this.
Again, Buenos Aires Herald editor James Nielsen. Could the United States have done anything about this dirty war?
The United States did something about the dirty war. Jimmy Carter's human rights policy must have saved thousands of lives here. It drove the generals here mad. It drove them up the wall. They hated the United States, but they realized that they had to desist from killing all the people they'd like because of U.S. reaction.
But what finally dislodged the military from power in Argentina was not the issue of human rights. Almost no one, as we've said, paid attention to the mothers who were marching here in the Plaza de Mayo. What really tore the power from the military government here was, first of all, the economic collapse of 1981. But most of all, it was their humiliating defeat in the battle for the Falkland Islands. Only then did thousands of Argentines begin to take to the streets. Most of those Argentines were overnight converts to democracy, but they joined forces with the mothers and the few other groups who had fought alone for years for human rights. Finally, the military were forced to back down, and last December, they turned over power to a freely elected, genuinely democratic civilian government committed to human rights. Recently, Argentine entertainers and artists performed in honor of the mothers in the Plaza de Mayo. For now, the mothers, the crazy ones as they were called for so long, now they have become national heroines. Everyone, it seems, had really been with them all along. These days, the military who ran the dirty war are the object of a newly discovered popular outrage. 9 members of the military juntas which ruled Argentina over the past 7 years, plus a few other top officers, are facing possible court-martial. But the cases against them are moving very slowly, and the mothers demand punishment not only for those few at the top who gave the orders, but for all the men who obeyed the orders as well.
If someone threw my daughter into the sea, I can accept that he obeyed orders. For me, he's a criminal too.
Are the mothers winning?
They have won a very important battle in that they have become, for millions of people, a symbol of resolution, of determination in the face of great adversity.
Here,
which is not a common enough characteristic in Argentina. Argentina is a very unstable society. It's a very insecure society. It's been unstable for decades, so people bend with the wind. This is normal and it's understandable. The mothers didn't bend. This is very important. They simply stood out, and they're still there.
You know, in my family, it seems, I hope, but you know, it's not much hope left, that perhaps some of my children will reappear. Not much hope left, to be honest. It's hope. But I think that I must be, as I'm perhaps the survivor, I have to denounce, and I have to claim for justice. So a thing like this doesn't happen again. Not only in Argentina, you know, in all the world.